Okay, all right. Thank you and welcome. And just thank you for your participation in such a great annual meeting. Like Karen said, hopefully next year we'll be in person and we can review all of the great, wonderful things that we were able to do in person. But tonight, this is the fourth and last installment of kind of our new program. This is something new that Monica and I put together this spring, and it's called Collections Conversation. And really what it is an informal discussion of things that we have in our collection, things that the community has brought, and just a great way to talk about things that many of us might not know about Laurel, about the history, about the people that we see on the street or we patronize their businesses. So this is taking us into some deeper dives. So the past couple months, we celebrated Black history, women's history, and we looked at the gardens of Laurel, centered around Montpelier and the Snow Hill Garden Club. So if you were interested in reviewing any of those recordings, they are on our YouTube channel, and I'll be able to put that link into the chat box just shortly. Like Jhanna said earlier, this is a Zoom meeting, so if you could please just keep yourself muted. However, we do encourage your participation. So if you do have comments, please put them into the chat. If you want to say something verbally, we ask that you kind of just raise your hands, and so we can kind of recognize you. And then that way we can get a virtual conversation going. It's worked out really well in the past couple of months, so I think this is also going to be a really great conversation tonight. So I am going to take another second here because I'm going to share my screen one more time. I have the slideshow on my other screen here. So all right, can everyone see that then? That's the intro slide. All right, perfect. All right, so then, like I said, we're just going to have a real fun, informal conversation. And I'm actually going to ask Jhanna to kind of do the introduction of the people and some of our panelists. And then you will hear me talk a little bit more. Unfortunately, one of our panelists and guest speakers, Randy Kroop, was not able to be with us in person tonight, but she did plan a lovely pre-recorded session with us. So we have that on video, so I'm going to be presenting that in just a few slides from now. But Jhanna, if you don't mind, will you kind of introduce the rest of our speakers, and I'll advance the slideshow.
Okay. Hi. So I just want to first say that this is a collision of all of my lives, it looks like, as I'm looking at this screen. And so as I was thinking about talking tonight, I was going to talk about that, but it didn't occur to me that any of the people I was thinking about were actually going to be on the screen. So welcome to all the people that I haven't seen in a long time and had nothing to do with the Laurel Historical Society, but know me anyway. So I'm Jhanna. I'm the president of the Laurel Historical Society. I live in Laurel. I've lived in Laurel for a while, and I think of myself as a Laurel person, and I'm Jewish. And I never, ever thought about how those two things had anything to do with each other. My entire life at Oseh Shalom, it never occurred to me that it was in Laurel, even though it was right down the street. And growing up in Laurel and talking about Laurel all the time, being Jewish had nothing to do with it. And so this is a really interesting intersection for me, and I never even thought about the two together until one day I was at Randy Kroop's boots, and I was buying my first pair of Kroop's boots. If anyone else has a pair of Kroop's boots, you are a lucky person. And I was very excited to buy boots from a, third, fourth generation female Jewish bootmaker. And I was super excited about it. And so I was talking to her about what it was, what it must have been like for her father and her grandfather to live through all of the ups and downs of Main Street. My family lived through the ups and downs of the retail establishment on Main Street. So I was asking her what it was like. And it was a business question, not a Jewish question. And she answered me explaining that all of the businesses helped each other out, and she started naming them. And what I very quickly realized is that every single name she named was a Jewish name. Yet I didn't know anyone with those names. I'd never met anyone in Laurel with those names. When we talk about the names in Laurel, those were not them. And so it got me wondering, what is going on with the Jewish history of Laurel? Because I don't know anything about it, and everyone I asked really didn't know anything about it. And so this is the beginning of that. And so, and thanks to Anne for coming up with this idea. And then I called Val, which was so awesome to reconnect with Val Kaplan, and here we are today. Do not expect the Jewish Museum, because that is not what's going on here. this is the beginning of something. So you are part of the very beginning conversation. And with that, let's get started with early Laurel history. And I believe that's the Randy part that I'm supposed to talk about. Yes, okay, so Randy Kroop, I don't know if any of you have ever were in her shop. It was on C Street. If you turned left at the meat market, depending on which way you were coming from. If you were headed towards Route 1, you made a left at the Cow. On the right-hand side was this sort of nondescript little white building. And in it was so much history that by a show of hands, anyone walk in there, ever. It would make you feel like you were, you know, in another time with, she had all the original equipment. It was incredible. And she told me so many stories of which we're not going to talk about here because they're not related to Judaism, but things like they made Seabiscuit's shoes. They made Seabiscuit the movie shoes. I mean, they were not just the Laurel boot people. They were the boot people for the horses. And we were lucky enough to have Randy as a part of our community. She was super into horses, and we brought her in during a horse exhibit. And she and I, just on a side note, she mentioned she was Jewish, and we started a whole conversation. And so this is Randy's story. And so you can see 1925 is the year that it opened. I'm going to let Ann take over because she actually spoke to Randy about these pictures. And I'm not going to guess what they are, but they're I don't even know if that's Randy in there.
No, it's not. Yeah, sorry to advance the slide there a little too quickly, but yeah, that's kind of the iconic, you know, sign that you think of, and it goes into that long family history, generation after generation. And so Randy, like Jhanna mentioned, has been a really, you know, good friend of the Historical Society, and we have copies of a lot of her images from her family. We actually have a shoe last. Marlene, I think we have a pair of the boots as well. So she's been very generous with having us be able to document her family's history. So these are two of the images that she shared with us, and I think they're so great because they go beyond just that little white building that Jhanna was describing. So the image on your right is actually their original building in Laurel, and they were on Main Street at the time. And so I think these are her. These not her. These I think they're her aunts or her older cousins, and that was before they moved to the C Street location. And the image on the left also kind of goes into this family tradition of boot making and shoe repair. This is her Uncle Charlie with two of the workers from his shop. And this is, she believes it's in the Westminster location, so this is not Laurel, but you can see again how the whole family was kind of trained and experienced in the art and the business of shoe repair and shoe making. So these were some of the great pictures that she shared with us. And then just real quick, see, these are some of the other ones as well. Her grandfather was featured as one of the members in the city directory of 1838. So that's a little bio of him and his image. And then the image in the top right is Randy's grandfather, her father, and her uncle. And you can see that they've got piles of leather all spread out on their workbench in front of them. And then the image of the gentleman in the lower right is her grandfather. And then just real quick, that's Randy. I think it's a great image of her. And then these are two of her employees from the days before she retired and then the shop closed. So Jhanna, is there anything else that you wanted to say about Randy before we watch her video?
No, let's watch her video first.
Okay, great. So I know this is going to be a little weird because it's going to be essentially a recording of a video recording, but do your best. Randy put a fabulous little presentation together for us, and so I hope you will enjoy it. Okay, hi. This is Ann Bennett. I'm joined today with Ms. Randy Kroop, and we are recording this session ahead of time so we can make sure that we talk with Randy and get some of her family memories and some other memories and stories from early Laurel history. So I am going to pass it over to Randy now. Randy, if you just want to introduce yourself to our participants when we're watching this in the webinar. Just tell us a little bit about yourself and your family business.
Okay. Hello, I'm Randy Kroop, and my family business is A.M. Kroop and Sons, which stood for Adolph Michael Kroop and Sons Incorporated. I always said I was the Inc. part of that because the Sons obviously was my uncle Israel and my father Morris. Never went by that name. He was always called May. Okay. And then my Aunt Mary also worked at the business. My grandfather was born in 1890 and migrated to the United States in 1906. So he was just 16 years old when he came. Quite an endeavor for a person to come across the seas. I can't imagine doing that myself, even in modern times. He got his citizenship papers in 1914, and my grandfather and my grandmother, who I never met, started the business in, I think first they started by the track in Pimlico in Baltimore, and later they moved to Ellicott City on Main Street. The building is still there. It was right across the street from the Kaplan's department store. And then in 1925, they moved to Main Street, Laurel. I'm told after I was getting some information that small businesses were too small to make it in Baltimore or in DC, and that Laurel was the ideal location for these smaller businesses to thrive. And so they moved to Laurel in 1925 on Main Street. They lived upstairs and they worked downstairs. My father worked with my grandfather, and later my uncle joined the business as well. They maintained that store on Main Street, I believe, until late 50s, early 60s when they moved to C Street. And my grandfather and father moved to Baltimore probably in the 40s when my grandmother was killed in a car crash. And then my grandfather remarried and moved to Baltimore, where they lived till the end, and continued to work in Laurel on C Street. So as far as being Jewish in Laurel, I got some very interesting information. I was always told there were just about 5 Jewish families, which would have been pretty isolating, but I spoke with a woman and I learned that there were originally 16 Jewish families, all who had businesses, all were merchants. And I have like the Ellis's Market, which was on Main Street, which was where Minuteman Presses was, and that beautiful mural that Bob did shows Shirley Ellis, who was very good friends with my Aunt Mary, and their mother was Ida, who was very good friends with my grandmother. Now, I was told that they had the money, and that during hard times, my Aunt Mary would go, my grandfather would tell her to go to the Ellis's to borrow some money or get some food. They did both keep kosher home, which is something I did not know, because when I met my grandfather, he did not keep a kosher home. But they would go to the market in Baltimore on Thursdays and Fridays before Shabbos, and Ida and Rose would get their groceries for their Shabbos meal. There was also Danny Snyder family. There were 3 boys, Danny, Leo, and Jerry, who owned the dry cleaners. There was a men's clothing store who was owned by the Stuart Schwartz. There was a fabric store. The owner of that was Irwin Fliss. I'm not sure how you pronounce it. There was the Light family who had a children's shoe store. And I was told that was the only store that you go and get they had an x-ray machine to measure your feet, which I found quite interesting way back then for them to have such a instrument. What else? Let's see. So as far as religion, my family was not very observant after my grandmother passed, but I was told by Elizabeth Sackman, who still alive and lives in Montpelier, the sort of history of the Shoals, that once there was the larger community of Jewish people in Laurel, this Stuart Schwartz would have an informal service in his house. And the person who conducted the service, his name was Harry Roseluntz. And then as the community got larger, they called themselves the Jewish Community of Laurel. And they met in the basement of the Citizens Building and Loan. Now, this is probably in the 60s. And then they purchased some property, a house on Mount Pleasant Drive in Montpelier, where they stayed until 1973. And then they moved to Briarwood Drive, where Rabbi Gary Fink, who was the rabbi of the New Temple, from 1980 to 2006. So that was all new information for me. I asked the Ellises, as well as, or Shirley Ellis, who's still living, who had the market, and Elizabeth, about prejudice against the Jewish people back then. And I was told no, that the Jewish families were very much appreciated and accepted and needed. And as Elizabeth told me, she never saw that any prejudices at all, and she was had very, very many Jewish friends, even way, way back. So that was very good to hear. I was very pleased to hear that. And what else I have to offer you that you don't have? Yeah, I think that's pretty much as far as Jewishness goes, that I can give you for the early days of Laurel.
Well, Randy, I think that's great. Did you want to? Okay, I'm going to stop it there because the rest of the video is just kind of me chit-chatting with Randy a little bit. So, so I hope that you got a bigger sense of what that early Laurel history was, and kind of what she mentioned, seeing those photographs of the early business on Main Street and then moving to the C Street location, and just what a Jewish community that there was, even to a family like the Kroops who were not living in Laurel as well. So let me just go back into presentation mode here, and then I will try to see if I can, okay, not play the video over again, but there we go. Is that okay? All right, Jhanna, is it okay if I talk for a few more minutes here?
Sure.
Okay, then I'll pass it back over to you and then to Fran. I know we're conscious of time, so I just want to fly through this. But one of the things is that we don't have all the answers about Laurel's history. And like we heard from Randy and like we heard from Jhanna, there's people that you talk to and see day in and day out, and you don't know their stories or their backgrounds or who their family involvement is. And so I just want to put this out there, is that we do have a copy of the 1938 city directory, the one we saw Randy's grandfather in. And we also just wanted to say that there are other business owners that possibly have Jewish backgrounds, but we don't know that. We don't have any way of confirming it. So we're kind of putting out the call to everyone tonight and everyone watching in the video later on, is if you have any information about the Steinbach family or Nathan Levin and the Laurel Pharmacy here, so that there are several others that there possibly could have a Jewish connection, because they do share some of the similar immigrant stories that Randy's family shared as well, coming from Lithuania or the Baltic states or Russia. So I just wanted to put out that call for information as well. And then before we continue on with the rest of our presentation, I just also want to mention that we do have a first in the community as well. And this is part of what is on display at the Laurel exhibit, the 150th anniversary of the incorporation of the city of Laurel. So that's the exhibit that we're getting ready to reopen in June. And so if you come, you'll see this plaque dedicated to Ruth Sussman. She was a member of the city council. She was the first female member of the city council and the first female council president. And she served in the 50s and 60s. And she was also a member of the Jewish community, although she was, I think, had more connections with the Baltimore organizations, and as we'll hear later in just a little bit from Fran and Valerie about the founding of the local congregations here in Laurel. So we wanted to recognize that and also tie in our current exhibit. I'll say current exhibit, but the one that we'll be getting ready to reopen very soon. And before we kind of segue into Fran's talk right here, is it okay if I just mention about the kind of the Laurel history and the commercialization away from Main Street? Does anyone have any other comments or anything before I continue? Okay, great. So again, talking about businesses, talking about Jewish families who are, very ingrained and instrumental in the history of Laurel. We're also going to be talking about the Berman family and the generations of their family and of their family business and how that had a huge impact, very literally and also physically, in the history of Laurel. So I know that we have a member of the Berman family here on tonight. So Mr. Berman, I don't know if you wanted to say a few words about your family and their history, if you wanted to unmute yourself. But I just want
to... This is Dennis Berman. And here, I'll even let you see me, although I don't look that great at the moment.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you. Denny had a wonderful conversation with me a little while back, and we were able to get some information and some images from our files to help him kind of tell his family's story here. So thank you so much for that conversation, for being with us here tonight.
You're welcome. My family, I grew up in Skaggsville. I was born in 1950 and lived from Skaggsville in 1950 to 1983. So I definitely considered myself part of Laurel, but on the Jewish part of Laurel, we actually went into town in the DC to go to shul when we went to shul, so wasn't so much there. But anyway, I don't know if you want to ask any questions or that's enough. Hello?
Well, yeah, anything that you wanted to share. I think it's great that we, through your family's business and interest and foresight in the community, that we have this great connection between what we heard already from the Main Street businesses to the commercialization of Laurel with the Laurel Shopping Center, opened in 1956. And then also Montpelier Plaza, as well as the other shopping areas and commercial properties in and around Laurel and Columbia. And I know that it really is a family business. I think the third generation is already involved with it. and you told me some great memories about some of the tenants at the Laurel Shopping Center. So do you want to say a few words about that? Because that'll be a great setup and introduction.
Yes, at the Laurel Shopping Center, now I was a little kid until a teenager when this was occurring, but it was very, very much a family. And by that I mean, when I would walk around the shopping center with my father or my uncle, the tenants would come out, would greet us, they greeted each other. We used to have a big party once a year out at our place in Skaggsville where we had a swimming pool, and the tenants would all come out with their families, and they really liked each other, and they were close. And in 1966, the shopping center doubled in size, and unfortunately, as you get bigger, that type of thing is lost somewhat. So, but but back then I have very fond memories of that, of the original tenants, whether it was, Albee Shoes and the Mel-Ron Fabrics, my Uncle Leon with the liquor store, Frank's Hardware. There are many, many different stores there. And some of them started chains, and the first store was in Laurel. Whoops. Something else just came on here. I apologize.
How do I mute it?
Okay.
Sorry.
Sorry about that. Anyway, that's, I could answer questions, but I don't think the show is really about me.
No, I think that's great. Are there any questions about the early history of the shopping center, about its expansion? I know we talked to Mr. Berman about how important philanthropy is to your family, coming from your father's influence, and how you're continuing to support Hebrew schools and Hebrew education. So you're still very much a part of the Laurel community, even though you said very early on that you weren't really a part of it, being kind of in Skaggsville, North Laurel area. But obviously the family legacy still is very much present here in Laurel. Okay, well, if there's no other questions, again, feel free to put any questions or comments into the chat. If we don't get it right now, we'll get it at the end of our presentation. But I'm going to do my best to stop talking right now, and I'm going to pass it over to Ms. Fran Fliss. And Monica is helping her as well. Monica is our assistant director, and I should say that she is the one that should get the credit for the topic tonight, is celebrating Jewish American Heritage Month in May. So I am going to try to find Fran in the participant list so I can unmute her.
We're already ready to go. She's unmuted.
Okay, all right. And Fran, thank you so much. Take it away.
Hi, glad to be here. That was my family's business, Mel-Ron Fabric. My husband grew up in Hyattsville, and they have a fabric store in Hyattsville. And then the Bermans built the shopping center. They moved to another store here in Laurel. They were there for many years, 1960, probably 1961, 62. And my father-in-law and all the other merchants from Albee Shoes and Sherry's and Millie and Max Kaplan, they would meet every morning after they opened the shops at the White Coffee Pot and have socializing with the other old merchants were socializing while the employees were getting the stores ready to open. So my father-in-law was Irving Fliss, and he passed away in 1967. And the merchants of the Laurel Shopping Center decided in the next few months to get donations from the merchants, and they bought a Torah from New York and dedicated it to the Jewish congregation of Laurel, which is now Oseh Shalom. And it was their first Torah. So it was with them. I have the Torah cover in my home. I have newspaper articles. And this was George Washington's birthday sale. Back then it was February 22nd. This many people were in our store at one time, not really socializing distances, but the fabric would be advertised at 22 cents a yard. Everybody would come in and buy on Washington's birthday. And my husband and myself and his brother Mel and my mother-in-law and father-in-law would all be in there working, trying to keep people straight, guiding them to what they really wanted. So it was quite active then. And Albie's Shoes was next door, and the Giant was on the other side of us. This was also George Washington's birthday sale. And then they had old fashioned. There was my mother-in-law, Shirley Fliss, and our father-in-law, Irving Fliss. And they were named the shop after my husband, Ron, and his brother, Mel. And they were there until 1975. And they closed the shop. And my father-in-law was a very well-liked man, and he was friends with all the merchants, and they had all kinds of socializing in with the different families. So they had old-fashioned days. Everybody in the shopping center would dress up in old-fashioned costumes. And from Mel-Ron, ones that were wearing this, they all had to make their own costumes. So my father-in-law is on the left, and Leon Pear is his matching swimsuit partner from the Albie Shoes. And I don't remember the name of the policeman there, but I think he had the laundromat in the shopping center. And the employees all made their own outfits, and they had such fun with it. This was quite a big thing. All the merchants in the shopping center would dress up in the old-fashioned costumes to have these sales, and quite elaborate costumes, some of them.
Fran, we just have a quick question for you. You had mentioned about all the tenants and kind of how family it was and how they would all get together at the White Coffee Pot. Was that like a chain, like little cafe, coffee shop?
Coffee shop.
What was it?
It was at the end of the shopping center. And it was owned by Stanley Katz. And the merchants would go there every morning for coffee and sit, and every day for lunch. So they all had quite a lot of fun joining everybody. And it was like one big family. And like Dennis Berman mentioned, I remember my in-laws talking about the parties that they used to have at the swimming pool at his house in Skaggsville. Everybody had really good times at these parties. Melvin Berman and Wolford Berman. It was like one big happy family.
That's great, Fran. Thank you.
So when the merchants decided to get the Torah from them, it was really a big thing. Mm-hmm. And this was a preview of the Heck Company, I believe, one on the left. Mm-hmm. And the other one is 9 years celebrating the shopping center. My father-in-law on the left, and on the left on both pictures. And Jerry Shear from Sherry's Jewelry Store is on the far left. And I don't recognize the man between the two of them. That was a big thing to have the shopping center there. It's where everybody went to the Giant most of the time. There wasn't too many grocery stores in Laurel at that time. And the merchants were kind enough to purchase the Torah and donate it into my father-in-law's memory, who he passed away in 1967.
That's great. Are there any questions about the family business or about the Laurel Shopping Center before we move on to the founding of Oseh Shalom and Fran part in that? Okay, then Fran, I know you shared a couple, some pictures and some clippings with us. Do you want to start with that?
Yes, this was, that's April the 6th, and I don't know, see the date on there, but it was 1966, 53 years ago, so 69. It was the house that was bought in Montpelier. They took out all the walls of the house, so that they one big, huge room, so there was room for chairs and for people to sit on. And then after a while, the traffic, the residents in Montpelier complained about the traffic on Fridays and Saturdays, so they had to end up selling the house, and they had to physically go back in and put all the walls back in that they'd taken out. And they moved to over off of Briarcroft Road into a building there and started making plans to build a place, which this was the first Torah, and the people who donated to buy the Torah were Stuart Schwartz from the Shirley Shop, Leon Burka from Albie's Shoes, Max and Millie Kaplan, Miller's Children's Shop, Leon Pear from Liquor Store, Melvin Berman, Frank Ackman from Frank's Hardware, Stanley Katz from My Coffee Pot, Jerry and Lee Shear from Jerry's Jewelry Store. And it was quite an honor. And they used this Torah for many years before it started showing its age, and they becoming a, and that's where they were evicted. There's the Stuart Schwartz on the right side. They were evicted from Montpelier, which is Stuart Schwartz bought house. And now that about 4 years ago, they had a restoration of the Torah, and people in the community were invited to come and help restore the Torah. And this is where people are not allowed to touch the Torah with their bare hands. So when this was done, it was quite an honor to be able to actually fill in the letters of the Jewish alphabet on, refilled them with black ink. And these are friends of mine, Alan and Mary Wright, and that came from Silver Spring to help fill in the letters. And it was quite an honor. My friend Alan Wright has a very religious man, and he attends services 2 or 3 times a week. And he was so honored to be able to do this that he was amazed he got the opportunity. And his niece is there, and his wife Mary, and his daughter Beverly. And it was very moving, very emotional. We had put the hand, you had this person she had to put her hand on top of the Jeffries, man who's doing the restoration. And this was very, very, very emotional and quite an honor. So this was the letters that we had to practice on, to take the black ink pens and fill in the letters so we wouldn't too far out of the lines. And I don't know what that says because I never learned to read Hebrew. But I guess there's a rabbi they could tell you what it is. But we all got the pins that you saw earlier that I helped restore Torah, which was quite an honor. And they invited all people from all faiths in Laurel to come and help. And they had the mosques and Baptist church and ministers from all over the whole area, and pastors came to help fill in the letters and restore it.
And that's the alphabet. We actually don't need it. I still remember that from my Hebrew school days. That's the alphabet.
You can read it. Go ahead and read it.
I can sing it, but I bet Cantor Charlie could sing it better than me. It's a good little tune. And it was really great. Well, it's the same thing that I was saying before, is that, you know, my relationship with Laurel and my relationship with Judaism never crossed. And one day I was sitting with Fran, we were both docents, and I said, tell me about yourself. And all of a sudden she started telling me the history of Oseh Shalom. And I was floored because, you know, I was a member of Oseh Shalom, and I didn't know Fran. I didn't know any of that. And so you can see where all of these things keep coming back together. And thanks to Monica, we have a program about it.
Well, one other thing that happened at the Laurel Shopping Center was George Wallace was shot. And it happened to be at the bank that's in the middle of the shopping center now. I think it was a suburban trust at the time. And he was speaking, and when he was shot, they closed down all the telephone lines and everything in the whole town. And one of the reporters, and I don't remember where she was from, but she ran into Mel-Ron and asked me if she could use our phone to phone in the story to her paper. And she got in, and just as she finished up her storyline, they cut the phones off. So she got a first smack at it because we let her use the phone. And about a week later, I got flowers delivered to Mel-Ron from her, thanking me for letting her get the scoop.
Okay, Jhanna, I'm just going to jump in here. Fran, there was a question earlier, if you would mind giving your opinion on it. Heidi asked that, as we had heard Randy say in the early history with the Jewish businesses on Main Street, she said that there really wasn't kind of any discrimination against the Jewish families or the businesses. They seem to be a very much appreciated part of the larger community. Would you agree that the Jewish community was accepted in Laurel at the time of the founding of the synagogue, at the time of your family's businesses, or was it a little more isolated to, you know, just within your religious community?
I don't recall any discrimination of any kind. I just remember being as part of the community. The only problem we had was being evicted from Montpelier because the traffic was too much for them.
Right. Well, I guess that's understandable too. And Fran, Randy had also mentioned a gentleman named Harry Rosenblum. Was he the acting rabbi at the time, or was that later, or how did that
He was the acting rabbi, and he was included in everything. I myself am not Jewish, and I was going to convert, and Harry came to my house every Tuesday for a year to teach me, taking lessons to become Jewish. But then when I found out that you had to do the mikveh, I chickened out. So I was never officially Jewish, but I was probably more Jewish than most Jewish women.
And Harry's a great person to even mention, because that's another intersection between the Historical Society and Oseh Shalom, because he was part of the Historical Society for a really long time. And again, even though I knew him very well, those two things never crossed for me. Although he did get to reenact his acting rabbi skills because he was able to do my mom's funeral for us, which was amazing.
You're talking about Harry Rosenbluth?
Yeah,
Yes,
he did my mom's funeral.
He was our acting rabbi for many years. He and Stuart Schwartz were the backbone of the whole situation, the whole thing that started.
All right, we have one more question here. She said that it's a fascinating look at Laurel's past. And how have the speakers seen the town's economy and cohesion change from then to now?
Oh, a big change. It has grown considerably. When I moved here from Ohio in 1961, 197 was one lane going north and one lane going south, and nothing but farmland in between the apartment buildings that is there now on 197. It was a little small village, which has grown into more like a metropolis now, compared to what it was then.
Thank you, Fran. All right, Val, you are up next.
Hey.
That was great.
Well, I'm really grateful to, let me clear some of this stuff off of the screen here. Yes, let me just start by saying that my husband and I found Laurel by happenstance when we got tired of trying to beat the traffic across the Memorial Bridge from Northern Virginia, because we both worked downtown. And it was happenstance and we found our way. And 197 was a 2-lane country road at that time. We were part of the group of people who moved into South Laurel. And so you're looking at our third and present home. And I want to just go back a little bit because, you know, as the good book says, in the beginning, there were the business people, but they were not really in a congregation as such. And it was really about people younger couples who had come to the area from Greenbelt, even some from Bowie, but the surrounding areas, who were living here, but really had no sense of there being a Jewish community as such. And as we say, life is with people. And so, you know, various couples started finding each other. Stu Schwartz, Stu and Marlene were unbelievable. I think my other favorite story is Jill and Marty Guzman, who also still live here in Montpelier, said that they were living, I think, I don't know, it was Fox Rest Apartments. And there was a knock on her door one day, and the diaper man delivered the diapers and said, by the way, I see that you're Jewish, because there was a mezuzah on the door. So you need to know about the Jewish congregation of Laurel. So it was one of those kinds of word of mouth things, as well as ads in the paper. And so there was this coalescing. Now, there were 16 families maybe in the beginning, and they moved from place to place. They were in bank buildings. Eventually they ended up in the house in Montpelier. And then, because of the traffic problem, we moved to Briarwood Drive. And that it was really quite a story. It was done very quickly. We had about a year to get out of our other location. So Rich Parson, who was member at the time and helped do most of the construction oversight and stuff, said, you know, they put up all the walls back in one place. And when they created the Briarwood Drive location, it was essentially a 6-sided space, which, if you look at a Jewish star, it's the intersecting triangles. That inner space is that particular, what is it, a hexagon? No, I don't know. Anyway, and so we were there and quickly outgrew it. It was open in 1973, and by the late 70s, we were talking about affiliating with the movement. We had been independent because our members were very eclectic. We had families who were raised from the most traditional to the most liberal, and interfaith families as well. And we wanted a place to be a community home. And so as we grew and grew for the High Holy Days, which for those of you who are not Jewish, I just think of it as kind of Christmas and Easter combined in terms of people coming out of the woodwork. We were able to start using St. Nicholas Church in South Laurel, and they were wonderful hosts for many years because we just didn't have the space within our building. It was a building that had partitions. We spent all our time, putting them up and taking them down. So by the late 70s, we decided we wanted to have a rabbi, a formal rabbi. Harry had been one of our part-time leaders. We had some rabbinical students. And at that point, we didn't realize that rabbis don't fall out of trees. And essentially, you really needed to hook into one of the affiliate movements. We spent a year in study to find what would work for us with our very participatory, very democratic, very pluralistic approach. And lo and behold, we affiliated with the Reconstructionist movement. I won't bother you with that discussion, but then it was a question of the rabbi. And we had made one offer, and it was declined for personal family reasons. The individual stayed near the seminary in Philadelphia. And lo and behold, one of our prior student rabbis, a guy named Steve Sager, had a friend named Gary Fink, who was a college buddy. And Rabbi Fink was then working at a congregation in Long Island and really wanted to have something of his own. Both he and his wife were from the Washington, Baltimore area. And lo and behold, we hired Rabbi Fink in 1980. And that began his 26-year time with us, during which we really expanded. And by the early 80s, we said, we have to think about what's next. Can we expand on Briarwood Drive? No, it was too complicated from a zoning standpoint. And that building was also overseen and constructed by Rich Parson. But, the leadership from Stu and then Bob Levin and Irv Goldstein and Harvey Post and a number of others were in from the get-go on this. So their question was, what do we do? How do we build? What do we build? And what does a synagogue look like? So we were interviewing architects. And the one that really caught our fancy, and I think it was probably in my living room in '83, this man named Travis Price, who today is a really well-known architect, very strong early passive solar. But the question he asked, and by the way, he was sort of a Zen Baptist Episcopalian army brat, really had not built a synagogue before, but he asked the right question. And he said, how do you want it to feel? And we went from there, and it became an extraordinarily participatory process. We had committees for everything, from the functions to the aesthetics to the symbols to this, that, and the other thing. And what you see here was when 8 years later, after wandering around and trying to find property, we were able to find this property on the corner of Olive Branch and Van Dusen, which is really across from the shopping center. But apparently it turns out if you pay for the road, you get to name it. So we named it Olive Branch because, as Fran mentioned, we were originally the Jewish congregation of Laurel. And by 73, 74, we decided it was appropriate to have a Hebrew name. Oseh Shalom is translated as one who makes peace or makers of peace. And so we branched from there. Our bottom line was that every space had to have at least two purposes because we couldn't afford to build out enough space for the high holidays and just let it sit there during the rest of the year when we had smaller services on Shabbat and the festivals. And Travis was really quite extraordinary in terms of managing the process with really every member of the congregation was involved in one way or another. And the result was something that we love to be in. What you see on the right were the models. And just to tell you, we had a mock-up model, which was on a huge piece of plywood, which was schlepped to St. Nick's at the holidays for at least 2 or 3 years. And it would sit there as a reminder of why we were grateful for our hosts at St. Nick's, but we really needed to get out of there and let them have the church back. But we picked up some wonderful ideas from their structure as well. So what you're looking at is the beginning of the metal structure. Travis, Gary, Mark Goldberg, who's a past president also, and myself were involved. Mark was really the everyday kind of overseer of the construction. We had professionals doing it, but Mark is an engineer. and was type A, who I think checked every rivet in the metal and who spent his nights figuring out how to solve the next day's problems. My kids think that was their third child in my family. His wife probably thinks it was the other woman. It was a very intensive process, but it took shape. And so by 1990, we began the construction, and that's what you're looking at there. So we'll see. I'm not sure what Anne has pulled up next. So these are just some documents from the early days. The dedication of the Briarwood Drive building and the first annual report. Now I have to say, my husband and I lived here since 1968. We found Montpelier because we couldn't stand Northern Virginia's commute. And in the end, what really attracted us was the city of Laurel, believe it or not. We said, you know what's great? It's a real place. I mean, there was a hardware store, there was Gavril's pharmacy and soda shop and all of the places that Fran and others have mentioned. And so instead of going to Columbia, we moved to Laurel and have been here ever since. So it's been 53 years, but we had not quite joined yet. We knew they existed. So, but this was a very important date for the community. So this is where we are. These are wonderful photographs. The one at the bottom, I think, is in the late afternoon sun when it's absolutely spectacular. The top photo is the view from the street before the landscaping. And the building is meant to be a teacher, because the question is, what is a synagogue? What is standard about a synagogue design? And there really are very few things. Unlike churches, which are based on either the Greek cross or the Latin cross, synagogues have been everywhere that Jews have been in the world over time. And so here, what you see it's a kind of a symbol of the wall in Jerusalem, the decayed wall, the western wall of the second temple. The stripes are the kinds of stripes that you see in Middle Eastern architecture. You see it in Jewish prayer shawls, and you see it in the leather straps that very traditional Jews wrap themselves with when they're saying their prayers every day. The blue is, it's kind of a Jewish color. The dark blue was, again, that thread of blue, which usually is in most of the traditional prayer shawls at some point. And the roof, well, it's like a skull cap, a yarmulke. And it's, again, a universal. A circle is infinite, and it's another reminder. The material of that, by the way, was something very new. It's cowwall. It's a is it a plastic? I can't remember, but it's layered with metal ribs in it. And it was the first time it was used in such a large size in any of the structures that this company had. But it's very solar friendly. And we had to replace it about, I don't know, maybe 5-6 years ago, which was quite a project to be able to remove all the parts and get new ones put into place within a very, very brief period of time. From the front, what you see going in is the letters of the alphabet. Jhanna, you probably should recognize this. Here you go, Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, etc. And it also, with the numbers, represents the 10 Commandments as well. The features here on each side are repeating those stripes, but they're a sukkah. In the Bible, of course, the holiday of Sukkot, which is an early harvest festival, the people are told to sleep outside and so that they see the sky. So during this holiday, which usually comes in early October, late September, early October, we cover it over with fruits and corn husks and enclose the space so it's a place where we can have services, have a dessert after the main services, etc. And again, it's kind of a welcoming, helps you channel yourself as you go in. The space above the door is a kind of a repetition of the temple in Jerusalem. And so we were repeating these things. Travis, by the way, spent about a year studying with Rabbi Fink, and then presented a 1-hour program for us with materials showing synagogues from all over the world and how different they were, as a way of teaching us that whether we grew up with a style that we loved or hated, we really had to go back into the collective history and pull the few symbols that we could to create this building as teacher, as well as a building that functions. So that was our original building on the left. That was the little shul in the woods. It was about 4,000 square feet. And I don't know if Mickey Goldstein is still on. We did everything there. We knocked the walls down. We did Broadway shows. We had a kitchen, which I suspect was not even on the plans, but we did do a lot of wonderful foods and desserts and celebrations, because what is a synagogue building? It's a place where you celebrate all of life, good, bad, from births, baby namings, to bar mitzvahs, to weddings, to funerals, and so forth. And then as well as the religious services during the week and the special holidays. So it was a remarkable space for 4,000 square feet. The first rabbi's office was a triangle carved out of a storeroom. And for those who know, the Purim cookie, the hamantash, it's like a tri-corner hat. That was the shape of his office. So we managed to stay there for a really wonderful number of years, but then moved to the Olive Branch location. We started construction in the summer of 1990, and we held our first religious service on August 31st of 1991, where we were still taking chairs out of cartons. I had to run down to Upper Marlboro to get the use and occupancy permit, and it was Labor Day weekend. And I just walked into, I think I parked in the county executive's parking space, ran in until I found someone. There was one last person there, and to get our UNO to open. On the right is a new addition, our biblical garden. And so the plants and materials are things that, of course, appear in the Bible. There's the grapevine back there. And then on the left, you can see a fig tree. This is down toward the end of the school wing, where the kids come in and out of the building each day. So the school wing is on the right, and the sanctuary in the middle, and then the social hall on the left, and the kitchen. So these are some great shots that were taken. These are more recent, but obviously with the moon at night, when the building is lit up, it really looks like a stage shot. But the same cow wall material is used for the rabbi's offices on the right, and for the kitchen on the far left here, and in the dome and in the entry hall. So what it's doing is allowing light. You really have a sense of the changing of the seasons and of the day. When it rains, you feel it. We had a very interesting high holiday service where it was literally storms, lightning, thunder, and I remember the rabbi tried to raise his voice over the storms, but we really feel part of nature. And of course, you see the cherry blossoms here. So these are our various prayer books over the years. We were not affiliated, as I mentioned, and we made up our own prayer books from other prayer books and created poetry and readings from a number of different places. And then when we affiliated with the Reconstructionist movement, which for those who are not familiar, is the first American-born Jewish movement really back in the 20th century, earlier 20th century. So the two books on your right and their cover pieces are here, the right with the burgundy and the facing pages in here. But the prayer books that we put together were really a wonderful labor of love. John Reel, who has been a member and former president and a religious vice president forever, was truly instrumental in these. Now, I have to mention that, so Rabbi Fink was with us. And then I think, what was it, in 1974, a young man wandered in by the name of Charlie Bernhardt, and I think he says what hooked him was that we were doing one of the liturgical pieces to the tune of Turkey in the Straw, and he thought, this is a place for me. Charlie's background is as eclectic as the congregation. He has total grasp of the traditional chanting and liturgy, and plays a guitar, and is a folkie from the get-go. Charlie has been our cantor part-time for 36 to 37, and he is now officially emeritus. And so we know we can't replace him, but we'll be looking for someone to fill the role in the meantime. And I know Charlie has been part of all of this as well. So I think that covers. So here you see, when you go into the building, there's the dome up there. And when you look on the upper right, you see what we've done. We've kept it very simple. The striping are these leather straps with the prayer, the Shema, which is what, if Judaism has one common core, it is that God is one. And that's the prayer that's in the little leather box. But this represents that. But when you look up above, you see the stages, and there's Hebrew calligraphy. Originally, we spent a lot of time trying to pull which verses we wanted. We gave up. And so there are pieces of the liturgy. So creation, revelation, and salvation, or however you understand it, is represented on the band going, the blue rectangular band, and then the two up above it. And so again, the building is teaching, because you're sitting there, and the theory is, if you don't know what it is, you hopefully will sort of check it out and want to learn it and improve your Hebrew reading skills and learn the lessons. Down at the bottom, the entry into the sanctuary is from a lobby which has, again, the same kind of design. It's called corbelling, that step back design, which was a feature of the Second Temple in Jerusalem. So we were picking up on that, and we have little gardens on either side of the lobby there. So you're looking straight in, and when you come in the building, that is your focus, is the sanctuary. That's the place where life cycles and services happen. And then the school is in the wing to the right, and the social hall and kitchen to the left. At the high holidays, we solved our problem of space by creating garage type doors at the far sides of the sanctuary that open into the classrooms, which provide expanded space. And from St. Nicholas, we discovered that there was a room, they called it the crying room, I think, but we decided to call it the children's room, essentially. But it has vision and sound into the sanctuary, but the little darlings can play without disturbing anyone else. So you can see on the left in the big picture up there, that garage door, which opens to the social hall, which again can be expanded for multiple services. On the lower right, that's our COVID picture. This is what has happened. And so I want to introduce our rabbis, who have been our rabbis since, for now in their third year, I think. Rabbi Josh Jacobsfeld and his wife, Daria Jacobsfeld. We are very fortunate. We really have a twofer who are like a fourfer, and who co-rabbi. And so they have been using the sanctuary when they can to do services. We haven't had people in the room, but it's all recorded and streamed directly. And so you see some of the technology there, and then set up very large screens so that they can see the congregants who are on screen. So we've done what we could. Looking at the altar space there between the two big pillars, Cantor Charlie's closet was to the right, and the sound equipment was in that sort of pillar-looking thing to the left. But the ark, which is directly in front of you, you can sort of see an image, and then maybe another picture in here. It's where we keep the Torahs. And so to go full circle back to Fran, a community, a Jewish community needs absolutely, the first thing they need is a Torah. It is the core of the community, learning, teaching, values. And so it was a remarkable gift at the time, I have to say. And yes, we have sort of retired it, but we're restoring it again. And I think we're back to where it needs to be. Fran mentioned a wonderful project a few years ago. There was additional work that needed to be done, but holds a very, very special place for us. Now above it is the eternal light, which is the symbol of God's presence, the light, of the divine, and the speaker pulpits there. Now we have a speaker stand here, and most of the time coming down to read the Torah here allows people easy access without having to go up higher. So, and that's something we've tried to be very aware of, is that access, that easy access. Let's see here. So there you go. So our Torahs with different covers, properly decorated, and just some other scenes. Rabbi Daria with the kids. I think they're in the grape arbor there, because she is blowing the shofar, the ram's horn, which is heard most at the Jewish High Holy Days, the announcement of the Jewish New Year, and the closing of services at the end of the day of Yom Kippur. And then the guys, we got the guys in the kitchen there. We do barbecues, we do all kinds of interesting events, and I think they're baking falafel, the chickpea, the wonderful chickpea thing from the Middle East, which you throw into a pita with lots of other good stuff. The children and their families are celebrating Hanukkah probably in December at one point. And up above, I think we have a bar bat mitzvah. I can't tell, or it may be the High Holy Days, but we, as you can see, women are always have been counted from the beginning. Traditional Jews said you have a community with 10 men, and the more liberal, including the Reform Reconstructionists, say 10 adults. So children become adults Jewishly at the age of 13. They can study and read from the Torah, but whether you have a bar bat mitzvah, and girls have been since 1922, you are of age. You're considered religiously and morally of age at 13, and you are entitled to be up there saying the blessings and reading from the Torah itself. So we have grown and shrunk and grown and shrunk and grown. And our community ranges really from Baltimore, from Anne Arundel County, from eastern Montgomery County, from northern Prince George's County, and always from the city of Laurel. The question was asked, how have we been accepted over the years? I will just give you one example. When we were building the new building, we put test panels out along Van Dusen, 3 color choices for the striping. And when someone vandalized it with swastikas and wrote them on the signs and on one of the construction trucks. And it was pretty awful. It was really a shock. And so we had a choice. Do we say nothing and go about our business, or do we let the community know? We did. And I have to tell you, there were sermons in every church in Laurel that weekend. I mean, we have always felt part of the community. We are now officially zoning-wise in the city of Laurel. And so we feel very well protected by the Laurel Police and have always felt part of the community. Generations of mayors have been in our buildings for events and for celebrations. And so I think it was never a question, actually. We've considered that as just, we hoped a one-off, and we hope it stays that way. So here we are now with new generations of children. One of our earliest teachers was Jackie Land as a college student. Jackie grew up and came to be our religious school director for, good Lord, I don't even know how long it was. And then she went on to work in our synagogue movement. But it has always been family. I think, you know, we talk about that, whether it was the merchants or whether it's a faith community, it really is extended family. Ours ranges a little bit more geographically, but one of the reasons we wanted to be near I-95 was realizing that with cars, people do travel. It's not the old days where everybody walked to wherever they were going to worship. And we stay open to a tremendous amount of diversity as well. I guess welcoming Josh and Daria has been a treat because they're wonderful young boys, are also a treat to have. But something happened this past Sunday, which I think just puts a capstone on all of this, which was the graduation and ordination of a Laurel girl. Michael Hess Weber has grown up in Laurel. Her parents, Randy and Heidi, have to be so proud. And she grew up in our congregation, so she was the first to become a rabbi, but I think she's probably the first homegrown Laurel rabbi as well. And it seemed like a perfect time to celebrate that, and it's during Jewish History Month. So it really has been the frosting on the cake. So I have yacked on too long, as usual. If there are questions, please offer them. I just want to say hello to a lot of the people out there who I have seen and worked with in many different causes in the city of Laurel. I've always felt like I'm a resident of the city, even though I'm not. And it's wonderful to see everyone again. So, done.
Does anyone have any questions for Val? First of all, Val, thank you. Fran, thank you. Randy, who's not on here, thank you. Any questions?
Everybody's exhausted and wants to go eat dinner.
That's probably true.
So,
So it is, I agree with you, Val. It is so nice to see everybody. I too got sucked into Oseh Shalom for many years, and I was honored enough to be able to teach the new Rabbi, Mikey Hess Weber, my rabbi for life.
yeah.
So I just, a few things really just hit me as, you know, I always say that Laurel is the center of the universe because it's 20 minutes from everywhere.
Yeah, that's
occurs to me as hearing, especially what Randy was saying, that, you know, it really was the center. I mean, if you didn't have this in Baltimore, Washington, well, of course you're going to come to Laurel.
Right.
And so, you know, it's nice to see that it's still the center of the universe, even just as
well, I think it's how many people, you know, many of these younger families moved here. I mean, if you were a two working couple or whether you had kids in one place or something else, or you worked, I mean, we worked in DC, but it was easy. And now my kids are, one of my daughters is living in the Baltimore area. So I've stayed put, created a disgusting attic, and I will probably be here till they dig me out. But we all come and go, but stay in touch, I think. And that's one of the great things.
Well, thank you. And I'm going to send this back over to Ann now. And Val, you should read the comments.
Oh, well, let's see here. Chat?
Go ahead, Ann.
Oh, okay.
Okay, yeah, well, while you're looking at the comments, I just want to thank everyone for being here, especially Val and Fran and Jhanna for moderating and just sharing all of your stories and experiences, because that just brings out the richness of Laurel, and that's the point of these collection conversations. They're centered around the tangible things, the things that we collect, the things that we preserve, but that's only just a touchstone to these deeper meanings and these deeper stories. So thank you so much for sharing them with the rest of us. I'm going to stop the recording now, so give me 1 second to do that.